Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Mindset for Mars. I'm your host, Turana Pascario. Today, we have an amazing guest. His name is Franz. He has a VC fund that's called Space VC, and they're based in New York. And fun fact, Franz and I actually met in a clubhouse room that he organized. He does all kinds of interesting things that are all space related. And the theme of this particular space clubhouse room was called Sex in Space. And there was some really interesting discussions there that took place. Maybe we're going to touch on that today. But first, let's welcome him. And Franz, how did you get into this industry?
Well, thanks for being here. I appreciate the opportunity. Again, everyone, Franz from New York. So I guess I'll start with my story of how I got to this point. I really started my career as an airline pilot, really across 14 different kind of aircraft to date. I primarily worked on stuff made by Airbus and Embraer. Also worked on stuff and operated stuff made by Rolls-Royce, Honeywell, Thales, CF6, Pratt & Whitney, IAE, Cessna, Beechcraft, and so on and so forth. So that's my, wheelhouse and background. Did that for about 12 years or so, really worldwide. So I used to, live in and operate out of a lot of countries where we had customers and so on. Towards the end of that career path, I still fly, but that's fun now. It's a different story. I have to make use of the 3 jet type ratings that I have on my license. But yeah, I fly regularly to keep myself current. Towards the end of that career path of flying, commercially and just, working with a whole bunch of engineers and so on and so forth in these kind of aircraft, I started to angel invest, and I really got the capital to start angel investing because at the time when I was flying, I also had some real estate that I popped off and, then started, investing into these founders, small checks into them. So I've been doing that for close to a decade now, about 9 years or so. A couple of years into that, I decided to go back to school. While I was doing my pre-MBA there, then I also decided to start a company. So I'm also a former founder myself. I did that for about 3 years. So it was a video-based dating product that I, founded. And, we had a pivot midway. So we were invited to Y Combinator out there in San Francisco, showcased the product out at TechCrunch back then in 2017. And really after that journey as a first-time founder and after screwing up everything under the sun, I realized that, there's no 2 companies are the same, and what works for me is not necessarily going to work for the second someone else. And that was really my all-in foray in the tech scene. After that experience, I kind of switched my own investing strategy and started looking at emerging managers of the VC asset class, much like ourselves now. And because of just the contacts and the circles that I was roaming in at that point in time, I backed a fund out there in San Francisco. That was Fund 1. I believe they're on Fund number 3 right now, and as an LP or a limited partner. Time went on. Did a couple of more deals, as an angel. And then I met my partner at the firm here at Space VC back in I want to say really late 2018, but it was more like early 2019. We were working on a separate problem for the GBFB, which is the Greater Boston Food Bank. Again, this was all remote before, the word remote was coined. And so we met for coffee in the city and realized there's a huge gap. We just really met because he's an investor too, and we're kind of interested in seeing what we both are investing in and so on. So that's why we met for coffee. And we soon realized there's a huge gap in the VC and the PE space when it comes to deep tech and biotech on the human longevity side. And which is how really Space VC was born, because we believe that there's a huge connection between space technology and human longevity. If you think really simply put, as you can see, more and more things are going into space. And human beings are putting up those things, And then eventually you're also going to have, humans living and working in space, as you can already see really on the ISS behind me on the Zoom call. This has been around for about 20 years, and there's been multiple teams working on experiments and things like that in and around this, right, in space. And this is just, we're at a point now where our technology has come to a level where putting up things into space has become really cheap, just because of the reusability of rockets and so on. And I'll get to that in a minute. But really, that is the main core reason why, like, the cost of putting up payloads into space is really, really exploding the space economy, really. And what we believe is that in the future, although space technology and human longevity are two very separate verticals at this point, there's going to be some kind of a confluence where more and more humans are going to be living and working in space, not only astronauts or people who are highly trained and so on, just regular jobs, space hotels, space tourism, just the regular folks working in like malls in space, things of that nature, right? And the limiting factor there is the human lifespan, because on an average, humans live about 80 to 90 years. And we believe that, or at least my partner is really into that, which is what he's investing in, believes that there is a lot of innovation being done on a molecular level when it comes to increasing healthy lifespan. And that's how Space VC came to be.
Wow, that's really amazing. What's your vision? I mean, obviously, this looks like you have a long-term vision for space, and of course, you mentioned there's going to be tourism, there's going to be hotels, there's going to be people working in space. How do you see this looking like in 20 years? This whole industry. I mean, if you could maybe put it into pictures, like imagine that it's going to look like X.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think I think to answer that question, we can probably walk through really what's happening in space today, and we'll get to that answer, right? And so if you kind of look at it, everything starts with putting up something into space, right? You have to start, and it starts with launching stuff into space, and really. And so if you look at that whole process, right, you've got your launch vehicle that you need to procure, you need to produce it, you need to then introduce that launch vehicle with the payloads that's going to go on, via the vehicle into space. So your satellites, your small sats, your CubeSats, your picosats, what have you. You have that as a process where you can then integrate the vehicle with the satellites or the payloads that you're going to put up into space, and then you have a launch window that happens, right, where you say, okay, these are the dates from the 1st to maybe the 15th of the 10th, that this looks like a very good launch window when it comes to throwing things up in space in terms of weather and what have you, right? If all that stuff goes well and there are no delays in weather, there are no delays in sometimes, and again, when you're launching stuff, for the most part, you're putting stuff into space, but a lot of times you're also going, visiting the ISS behind you. So there has to be some coordination there in terms of, make sure that there's no manifest changes. You also want to make sure that there's no delays in your development, manufacturing, and just any kind of anomalies, right, to put up all these things. All that stuff works, right? You then kind of like start putting up your stuff in space. And if you think about it, a lot of these companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin and so on, a lot of people probably don't know this, but they've been around for a long time. They've been around for about 2 decades or so, give or take, right? And back then there was none of this stuff was going on, because it was very like, the main, at least here in the US, it was very NASA's quote unquote centric, and NASA was in this kind of lull structure, and the technology that, the launch costs were really high. So people were not really attacking this problem. And I think now the world's, internet and the way we communicate and talk to each other, has reached a point now where we can kind of build things really rapidly and quickly and cheaper. And that's really what you're also seeing, in the launch cadence into space, where, again, as I mentioned before, prices are going down. The window of, relaunching is going up. So if you think about it, I'll give you an analogy about aviation and space industry. If you're in Paris, you probably took a flight from London to Paris, and then you're going to take another flight back, right? Now think of it in this way, where if you took the aircraft and you had to just do one flight to Paris and just throw that aircraft away, that would be a really expensive endeavor, right? But now what's happening is the airline industry has reached such a level of safety where you take the aircraft from one point A to point B, you debark the passengers, and you put them, you fill it up again, and off you go again. And that's really where you make your money, when the aircraft is in the air. The same thing is going to happen when you see more and more rockets going to space, with more and more, when the schedule of events start to happen within hours instead of days and months. That's when you're really going to start to see a huge boom of activity. And I think, to answer your question, before I jump into the numbers and all that stuff from space, I think specifically in about 15 to 20 years, well, in about a decade or so, you're going to start seeing space tourism really take off. The level of safety in these vehicles that are flying into space is really going to go up. Mishaps, there probably will be, that's just a given. But I think in 20 years, to specifically answer your question, I hope that we can, have boots on, quote unquote, Mars, because I like to go progress things in steps, as opposed to just, jumping into different, jumping steps. And I think that really the first real celestial body is going to be back on the moon. We're going to see more boots on there first, in terms of people working there, moon bases, infrastructure around the moon. Yes, there's going to be stuff sent to Mars, but that's really a different challenge, and it poses a different set of challenges. And again, we're looking at Space VC, we're looking at all of this from an investor standpoint. You want to invest in the infrastructure first that really makes the base camp of everything. And once that infrastructure is really strong and you've invested in those founders building on that infrastructure, then you can go to the next level where, I really have a solid foundation to stand on. Now I can build on something on top of this, right? And that's how that is going to progress down the line.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I was thinking back at the topic that we were discussing on Clubhouse in terms of sex and space, and really one of the most interesting ideas there was, do we even know? Are we even has it even been proven that humans can actually reproduce in space? Because the whole idea of, which is a huge vision, obviously, the whole idea of humanity kind of expanding into deep space and just flourishing there, is that we can actually do everything that we do on Earth, including reproducing ourselves, that we can do it in space. But do we even know that that's possible? I mean, I think it's such a huge vision, but it depends on some of these things that pertain to, what it is to be human, and the fact that we have evolved on this planet specifically. How do you see that unfolding?
I mean, I think from a founder perspective, and I always think from a founder perspective, that's really what I am. The whole problem of solving the gravity issue, right? And I know there's founders as we speak that are working on this problem to create vehicles or habitats or what have you, spacecraft that have some kind of artificial gravity attached to that, where we can live and work in semi-normal how it's like down here on Earth. I think that's really, you're going to start seeing innovation on that front first, and then there's all other founders who are building stuff to mitigate risks in terms of radiation and so on and so forth. You think that's a huge risk when it comes to living and working in space, right? And again, talk about longevity, that's something that really poses a massive risk. So there's a lot of people that I know of and companies that are now actively innovating in in technology and solutions that are going to help mitigate those issues. So really, I think it's going to boil down to initially tech that's going to kind of allow us to behave the way we behave here on Earth. But then down the line, you never know what could happen. Things could take a different turn, and you never know.
So you think, probably people will be living in sort of the rotating O'Neill cylinders that have artificial gravity, and then maybe just working on places like the moon?
You did cut off there, but I think I heard what you said. I think so. Yeah. If you think about that movie Elysium, right, where you have that circle kind of thing, and that's really for the gravity problem. Like the whole thing is really turning around really quickly, and that's creating some kind of an artificial force that's keeping people stuck to where they are really. And I really do think that that's going to be in the next decade or two or more. You're going to start seeing a whole bunch of these, quote unquote, space stations like the one behind me here being put up. You're already seeing China is doing that in late 2022. You're going to have, Russia is coming up with their own space station. The initial part of that Chinese space station is already up there, right? And you're going to start seeing more and more countries put up their assets into space. The ISS is going to be taken over by a company called Axiom Space, and it's going to be fully privatized. They're going to kind of strip away a lot of the older parts of this whole station and reconstruct newer parts of the station as well. Because that's really the broad vision there, and really to serve as a jump off point, as like a gateway to other folks. That's really the vision there, and it's a pretty cool company. Full disclosure, one of our partners is an investor in the company, so I have to mention that. But and so you're going to start seeing more and more founders really. You're already seeing an explosion of companies, about 5,000 plus in the US alone right now, not to mention Europe, India, Australia, Japan, Russia, obviously, China. All these countries are really, the UAE. Let's not forget about them. Africa too. If you think about it, everyone's talking about space, and including South America. So it's really taking off, and which is why we're doing what we're doing. And it's also important to note. I want to mention this, that I have been tracking space for maybe 7 or 8 years. Just because of my background and what I was doing before my previous career. I know a lot of people at these larger companies and corporations where they have they've been working there, and they kind of spun off doing their own things in the quote unquote space sector. And it's always intrigued me. I've been a huge I grew up as a kid watching Star Trek and Star Wars, and which is one of the reasons why I became a pilot in the first place, because I wanted to get up there. I kind of like had achieved 50% of that, but I need to it's the dream to go into space. Obviously, that's on the bucket list for sure. But yeah, that's where. So we can continue. Thanks.
Okay. One last question, because I know you have a tight schedule today.
No, I can stay. I said I can stay for.
Oh yeah. Sorry, it cut off. I didn't hear you. Fantastic.
Yeah, you're gonna ping me when I need to jump off. So.
Amazing. Well, actually, I do want to ask this question anyways. So would you actually consider living in space in one of these communities?
Yes. Resounding yes, for sure. Well, that would depend on a lot of things, but if it was up to me, only yes, I would definitely live and work in space, and yeah. And even now, like, so if the opportunity arises to kind of be one of the initial guinea pigs to kind of like go up there and test, quote unquote, test things out, I'm all for it for sure, because that's really. We really need people like, I'm not saying people like me, far from me, but like just people who are willing to take that, quote unquote, risk, that moonshot, really, to propel humanity into the next level. Because really, if you think about it, if you don't have someone who takes these risks, and you know, there's no way around it. There's no all, you know, you can simulate all you want. You can have you can run countless simulations, but until you've been there and done it yourself, there's really no way to tell how things are going to pan out. So a lot of people, you know, rely on models and stuff like that, which is great. But in my past experience and so on, I think being there physically and really, like, you know, going through the problems that need, you know, it's, you know, maybe solving them, that's the only way to learn, you know, just living through it.
I totally agree. And, you know, the reason I started this podcast is because I'm interested in the psychological aspect of going to deep space and living in space, because, you know, that's what I do. I'm a coach, and I'm very interested in human potential and the human psyche. And I think it's a huge challenge. I mean, beyond the technical, of course, you need the technical in order to actually get to space clearly. Like before anything, then there's a technical aspect, and that obviously is being extensively worked on. Well, once we actually do solve that problem, which, you know, it seems like it's going to be very, very soon, you do have the very real problem of humans who are designed for this planet and who are very sensitive to even minute changes. Like, you know, imagine all the people who get depressed in winter, right? Even such a small change in conditions can really affect their mental health. So for me, it's very interesting to think. For me, as somebody who, you know, thinks about the human psyche a lot, it's very interesting to think, how are we going to make sure that people who do live in space and work in space are actually stay sane and you know, thrive and have an optimal way of functioning. So what do you think is going to be the biggest challenge in terms of living in space and working in space for extended periods of time, beyond the gravity, because, you know, that affects your body, but beyond the gravity?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, again, you know, once we've kind of solved or mitigated some of that radiation problem, really, that's going to be a huge thing, because, you know, again, well, gravity is one problem. The other part is the radiation kind of things. Once you've solved that radiation shielding, you know, issue or the problem, once we have products that kind of, you know, help folks to live safely and function, then the other aspect of that is the whole, as you pointed out, the psychology effect of kind of, you know, living in these, you know, initially I would imagine smaller groups of people, habitats that could very well be under the surface of anywhere, that if you're on a different planet, the most logical thing would be to kind of like, you know, create a habitat in one of these, they're known as lava tubes or what have you. So just this you know, tunnels that where the soil is really kind of mitigating a lot of that radiation effect. That's really the issue why you go down there, you know, to initially live down there. Yeah, you know, listen, it's not going to be easy, I feel, the first couple of decades. But that being said, I think, and we've seen this happen here on Earth, where human beings work in some of the harshest environments in around. I know this from my own father. He was in the petroleum industry, and he would work on the rigs and so on in the North Sea, and, you know, in some desolate areas for months on end. And you know, they cope with it, and I think we have a strong capability of adapting and coping with situations, right? And I really think that's, you're really going to see that play out with you know, when it comes to space and exploration in space and deep space and all the planets and so on. Yes, that's what I really feel.
I really like that optimism, and I believe the same. You know, it's clearly humans do, and especially when they're extremely motivated, because I do believe that, especially at the beginning, people who will go into space will be people who are very, very excited and passionate about it. It's not going to be just anybody who ends up there, especially because it's so expensive to send humans into space. So you're going to have to prove.
For now.
Yeah, of course, for now. But still, I think, you're going to have a certain level of dedication, and not everybody will actually want to expose themselves to the risk. So yeah, I think people who are very, very interested and very dedicated will definitely put up with things. Yeah, so like as you said, until you actually get there, it's very hard to imagine how you're going to solve the problems, because you don't really know how people are going to feel, how they're going to react. There's of course some conjectures that you can make, but there's always the test of practicality.
Right.
My personal mission is to anticipate some of these problems and train people, like you were talking about, the fact that people live in very small groups. And for me, for example, one of the things I would really want to train people in is how to have better relationships. Because if you are stuck with a very small group of people, usually, relationships can break down very easily unless you've actually really learned how to interact and how to have healthy dynamics. So that's one of the things that I personally thought about that would really make a difference. If you're stuck with a group of people for a very long time in a very small space, then you better learn how to get along. And I think, we don't think of this because now we have the option of always kind of escaping. Like, hey, you don't like the people you're hanging out with, you can always meet new people, you can take a walk, you can be in nature, you can, whatever. But that's definitely not an option when you are in a small space. And from the research that I've been doing, people who are doing simulations, or even sort of similar environments, such as submarines or the Arctic, or as you said, like oil rigs or anything of the sort, a lot of times relationships do break down, and it threatens it threatens people's well-being, it threatens the mission. And of course you can survive. What I'm talking about though is thriving, because if you're thinking of actually living there for, like, you guys are investing in longevity as well. So imagine having an even longer lifespan, and having to live in a place where you're not thriving and you're just barely surviving. I think that for the way I see life, that is not a great proposition. So my interest is in how would people thrive.
You cut out there. Right. That's a good point, because I think you can think of space VC, or what we're doing is, as like the tip of the iceberg. And we're kind of like investing, and that's really, the whole iceberg is a pretty huge structure. If you look at it below the sea, right? They always, I think you've seen that picture where you have like the point sticking up, but then if you really look at it, it's a massive structure beneath it, right? And that's really the whole space and longevity industry. If you think about it, and that, using that as an analogy, where we're just, we want to do this as, as a tip of the iceberg, and to get this thing started. And then, kind of like go from, and then it's kind of like going to spread out from there, because you can really start looking at, again, founders and companies and so on who are building, things from Mars right now, because you're not even there yet. As I mentioned, it's kind of like a logical, and at least I cannot speak for any other, investors in the space, because everyone's doing their own thing. But what we are looking at is a very logical progression of say, backing these companies and these founders, where it kind of pushes the whole industry in one, in this direction, where we become a multi-planetary species, if that makes sense. And it certainly helps that today's billionaires and trillionaires, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, they're, pro space, so, which is great.
Yes, absolutely. It seems like private individuals pushing this is working better and more efficiently than governments doing it. The personal ambition and personal passion seem to again, the human factor, they really seem to go a longer way.
I
Than
think that's going to be, by the way, that's going to be a huge area, which I'm not seeing, by the way, yet, where, and that's a low hanging fruit, again, where you can have founders who are going to kind of innovate in that wellness space in space, no pun intended, but
Mhm.
that's that, yes, there's obviously, all like, I'm pretty sure, well, SpaceX, Blue Origin, and NASA and everyone else who is doing stuff in space, they have not only a medical division but also a definitely a psychology division as well. But in terms of private companies that are going to start sprouting up, and the more and more you have these experiences, right? The more and more space tourism starts to happen. I'm not in orbit. So more and more people start going up to orbit. You're probably going to start having a lot of these issues or feeling things that you never felt before. And I can only relate to this because it just takes me back to my career of flying around this planet. It's a different ball game when you're sitting up at, I think, 41,000 feet, over the ocean, say at night, with just 200 people behind you, and it's just totally dark and black, and you can see the stars above you and just black below you, right? It's like naive solitude and instant death, right? If you think about it in that sense, it's pretty scary sometimes, and so I can only imagine what the experience and the feeling would be like when you're up there, right?
Mhm.
One day, fingers crossed.
What I do think also is that it's going to, I mean, this is my personal theory, but it's quite well supported. I think it's going to absolutely help skyrocket innovation because, all astronauts who have returned from space and have talked about it say that it just the exercise of looking at the planet from a distance um, gives them a completely different perspective, a much bigger perspective, and it's very mind expanding to suddenly see yourself at that level of perspective. So I think it's going to really help. Um, well, a sort of consciousness revolution, if you will, because people will suddenly have that perspective that they've never had before. And from what you're saying, it is possible that it will happen at scale quite quickly. I mean, in the next 20 years, a lot of space tourism, people actually working in space. So there's already going to be a huge number of humans that have never been to space before, experience space quite extensively and experience this mind expansion, which I think is absolutely phenomenal. So I think, probably we're going to see an explosion in innovation and what people think is possible that we've never even seen before.
Sure. And think of the innovation from that perspective, like just products, stuff like that, right? Think about it, well, Instagram on speed, right? Where you have people taking
Yeah.
selfies when we're floating around or in zero gravity or whatever. You're gonna have that, right? Where if there's any attraction that comes up, like I don't know if you've been to. So you're in my window. It's Hudson Yards, and it's like the highest lookout point now here in the city. And when it first started, there was a line of people, waiting to go up and check it out. Right. I think the same thing's going to happen when it comes to, the tourism industry as it's going to happen in space. And you're already seeing initially, milestones being achieved, like companies like Virgin Galactic. There's going to be others for sure that are going to come down the pipe. Again, as safety goes up, more and more of this stuff's going to start to happen. So it's inevitable. So yeah.
One of the coolest ideas that I've heard is that, Jeff Bezos was really comparing it to building the infrastructure for people to be able to do business in space is kind of like um, the next version of the internet, whatever the internet did for business. This is going to obviously be exponential. And he was saying that he's interested in building that infrastructure so that people are able to very easily and quickly create, be space entrepreneurs, whatever that may mean. Because of course, right now, as you said, we don't even know, like we're not creating products and services for that because we're not there yet. But I think that's one of the most innovative and amazing ideas of this century. Do you see that happening in our lifetimes?
I mean, sure, yeah. You already have companies who are working on, various aspects of communication that we're looking at ourselves. Um, that really right now the focus is to blanket the Earth in internet, pretty much. That's the focus right now. And really, you're seeing the satellites and swarms of satellites and things that are being putting up there is to provide internet services and just services, telecom services in general for our planet, right? That's where really the capital is right now. But you're right. The next phase of, and he is right. He's obviously right too. Where the next phase of all of this, once that is a problem as a whole that's going to be solved, obviously the next place, if you look down where the entire Earth is covered with internet, and there's, you think about our connectivity right now, like it's pretty seamless if you think about it. But now add up all the all of this infrastructure, which is part of again, the infrastructure that we're part of what we're investing in is exactly that infrastructure as well. Initially, the only other place to replicate that is going to be up in space, right? Where now once you're used to having this ability to communicate and pass on information here, as we start going up to space and living and working there, you're going to want to, you're going to expect that as a human being to kind of like get that same service when you're either on a station revolving the planet, or moon base or Mars base or what have you. And that's where you're going to start seeing more and more infrastructure being built out. A lot of companies are attacking this problem too. Satellites around the moon for communications there. Internet in space. There's a company called Solstar where one of our partners is an investor in there too. What else? I mean, as you can see where I'm going with this, it's all about the infrastructure layers of how this thing is going to keep on building one on top of each other, right? And that's how this explosion is going to happen. It is happening right now as we speak.
Okay, one last question that I think it's looking at a bigger vision, because I was thinking, you were saying seamless communications, and it suddenly made me think of Mars, because that is a different situation altogether. Because with Mars, the amount of time that a communication signal takes to travel is about 20 minutes, right? So you can never have direct communications. It would always take about 40 minutes for anything to go back and forth, so that you can actually receive a message and communicate back. So that means that world would essentially be isolated to a certain extent, right? So you could never actually have direct conversations with anybody from the planet. So it would create a very different world in itself that has to be much more self-sufficient. You can't have your family, because right now a lot of people are, they're on the ISS, and then they're having regular calls with their families. It makes them survive, and it makes them feel connected to the planet.
There's internet on the on there, so which is great. But so we don't necessarily think of it in that sense. I think when that happens, when there is settlement on Mars, that distance, I think you're going to, by then you're definitely going to have, across the whole distance between Earth, Moon, and Mars, you're going to see some kind of space. Think of it like telephone poles, right? If you're going these you're going across the country, you're driving or whatever, you see, or wherever whatever country, in a lot of places they have these poles of wires running across, right? Think of it of that of these poles being in space, right? And you're going to probably see that companies providing that as a service, companies providing the hardware as a service, right? To relay those signals to the point where it becomes, like, you could be sitting on Mars and doing this interview with someone me on Earth, or vice versa. And that's way down the pipe, but we definitely do see that, happening in the future. I don't think there's going to be any, if we do become a multiplanetary species, I don't think there's going to be lack of communication. I think, if anything, what we're seeing from an investing standpoint, so to give you an example, right? Satellites is, there've been about, I want to say about 1,900 rounds of investment just this is in satellites alone, right? Communication is a close second to that. Earth observation, communication, satellites. So again, it's we as humans are putting up more and more things into space only because we want to increase our connectivity, and I think that's going to happen, down the pipe too, and as it relates to space, as well. Of course, that's way down the pipe, but I don't think it's going to be a world. I don't think there's going to be a world that exists where you have Mars on its own, and then Earth on its own, and so on and so forth. Right? There's going to definitely be some interlink there, for sure.
One of the things I absolutely love about talking to people who are in this industry or just passionate about space is that they never see obstacles; they always see solutions. And I think that's actually, the mindset and just generally the way of looking at the world that is going to create all that innovation. And also another thing is that, from what you're describing, like it becomes apparent, because even if we're looking at numbers, sometimes it's very hard to actually make it palpable to a human being just how huge this is. But when you're starting to talk about, communication to Mars and the equivalent of obviously internet or telephone poles on the way to Mars, like just the scale of that kind of shows you the scale of the industry that is possible. It's essentially, it's an infinite space where you can create stuff, and obviously the financial returns are to match,
Right.
which I think is absolutely phenomenal. And that's why I was asking you to kind of put it into, to make it more palpable, so that I can understand your vision, because that brings it to life. This is what it's going to look like. Oh my God, it's huge.
And if you think about it, the reason why we're doing the whole longevity bit is the other part of it. Because stuff like that need to see those returns, right? And they start living longer, then they therefore see those returns in that sense. But then also people who are living and working in space on these quote unquote imaginary poles going to Mars or whatever, you're going to have a slew of jobs, right? A whole bunch of economies of scale around the Earth, around Earth, the Moon, Mars, and everywhere in between, because with all these innovations and things of that nature, right? You need to have, technology. Technology needs to be worked on, maintenance. There's a lot of stuff that goes with it, right? Companies can be formed, and so it's definitely a great time to be alive, for sure.
Yeah, I do agree with that. Is there anything else that you would like to add before we close off this podcast? It's been an amazing conversation, by the way. Absolutely phenomenal.
Oh yeah, great. Yeah, I didn't know what to expect. I thought you wanted me to go over numbers and so on, so which is fine. But no, I don't have anything else to add. I just hope that more and more people get involved, in space, and then also in our case, both space and longevity. Because the more people we have, when people who have nothing to do with space or longevity start talking about it, that's when we know that we're kind of won that battle, where everyone's talking about it now. And which is why we're so supportive of people on Clubhouse and, all these other places where we always try to, kind of work with other, investors and founders and so on, as opposed to viewing them as competition, because that's not, space is for everyone, right? Think about it. It's huge and we're just a dot. So if you think about it in that sense, I guess that's all I have to say about that. Yeah.
That's amazing. And I absolutely love that. And again, yeah, it is about cooperation. See, that's another thing that I always notice is that people see, they see solutions and they see opportunity for everybody,
Yeah.
which is absolutely extraordinary. Thank you so much. I don't want to keep you any longer because I know you have
Sure.
stuff to do. Amazing. I can't
Yeah.
wait to see what you guys invest in and
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
posted. And yeah, everybody. Franz from Space VC. He lives in New York. He is an extraordinary genius. And
Thank you.
well, I just see that way. So thank you so much for being with us. And guys, please don't forget to subscribe. And I'll see you on the next episode. Take care. Bye.